Blessed are you when men persecute you for righteousness, Sake. Rejoice, for great is your reward in heaven. Matthew 5:10-12, paraphrased. Introduction. The most misunderstood blessing. Why persecution has been romanticized and misunderstood. The danger of seeking suffering instead of righteousness. How emotional Christianity distorted Christ's words. The Grail Message is light for lawful understanding. Among all the words spoken by Christ, few have been so frequently quoted and yet so gravely misunderstood as his declaration, "Blessed are you when men persecute you for righteousness, Sake. Rejoice, for great is your reward in heaven." These words have echoed through centuries, inspiring courage in some, but also confusion, distortion, and even self-inflicted error in many. They have been lifted from their lawful foundation and turned into a banner for suffering, as though pain itself were a virtue, and persecution a proof of holiness. This misunderstanding has done deep harm to human spiritual development. Persecution, in the light of the Grail Message, is not a blessing in itself. It never was. Christ did not praise suffering, nor did he call human beings to seek hostility, rejection, or hardship. To believe so is to reverse his teaching and to misunderstand the laws of creation. The blessing he spoke of lies not in being persecuted, but in remaining faithful to righteousness when persecution arises as a consequence. The distinction is decisive. Where it is ignored, clarity collapses into emotional confusion. Over the centuries, persecution has been romanticized. Stories of martyrs have often been presented in a way that subtly glorifies pain rather than faithfulness. This has led many to unconsciously believe that the more one suffers, the more pleasing one must be to God. Such thinking does not arise from truth, but from emotionalism. It shifts attention away from inner purity, upright will, and obedience to the laws, and replaces them with outward hardship as a supposed measure of spiritual worth. In doing so, it dulls discernment and opens the door to grave self-deception. The danger becomes even greater when persecution is not merely accepted, but actively sought. Some provoke hostility through harshness, arrogance, or spiritual pride, and then call the resulting resistance, persecution for righteousness, Sake. This is a profound error. Christ never blessed obstinacy, lovelessness, or fanaticism. Where persecution arises from human wrongness, lack of wisdom, or inner impurity, it carries no blessing at all. Instead, it binds the individual more tightly to the consequences of their own misconduct. Here lies one of the most damaging distortions of emotional Christianity, the separation of Christ's words from lawful cause and effect. In the Grail Message, it is made unmistakably clear that nothing stands outside the laws of creation. Blessing does not descend arbitrarily upon suffering, it unfolds lawfully from inner alignment with truth. When Christ spoke of reward in heaven, he was not promising future compensation for endured pain. He was pointing to the inner upliftment, strengthening, and spiritual elevation that naturally result when a human being remains faithful to righteousness despite opposition. Emotional Christianity, however, transformed this lawful process into sentiment. Heaven was imagined as a place of deferred payment, persecution as a currency, and suffering as spiritual capital. In such a view, inner growth becomes secondary, while endurance alone is exalted. This is not enlightenment, it is a dimming of spiritual vision. It blinds humanity to the real task: purification of will, clarity of recognition, and steadfast obedience to truth. The Grail Message restores what has been lost by placing Christ's words back into the living order of creation. It shows that persecution arises when light confronts darkness, when truth disturbs falsehood, and when uprightness exposes injustice. In such moments, opposition is not sought, but it may come. The blessing lies in not abandoning righteousness out of fear, convenience, or desire for acceptance. It lies in standing firm without hatred, bitterness, or inner collapse. Seen in this light, persecution becomes a test, not a goal. It reveals the quality of the human being's inner state. Does one remain calm, pure, and just? Or does one harden, become resentful, or secretly enjoy feeling chosen through suffering? The laws respond precisely to what lives within. Where righteousness is genuine, the inner being is strengthened, refined, and lifted. That is the reward in heaven, a state of being, not a distant prize. This book is written because humanity today stands in urgent need of such clarity. In an age where victimhood is often glorified, and suffering is sometimes worn as a badge of moral superiority, Christ's words are again being misused. At the same time, many who truly wish to live uprightly are confused, discouraged, or misled by these distortions. They sense that something is wrong, yet lack a clear framework for understanding. The Grail Message offers that framework. It does not soften Christ's words, nor does it intensify them emotionally. It illuminates them lawfully. It shows that righteousness is active, conscious, and responsible. It demands clarity, not fanaticism, courage, not provocation, humility, not self-glorification. Only within such a foundation can persecution be understood correctly, as a possible consequence of living in truth, never as a desired path. Thus, this introduction sets the tone for what follows. We will not glorify suffering. We will not encourage fearlessness through recklessness. We will seek understanding, not sentiment. Step by step, the light of the Grail Message will clarify what Christ truly meant, free his words from centuries of misuse, and restore them as a living guide for human beings who wish to stand upright in a confused and often hostile world. Only when righteousness is understood first can persecution be understood at all. Only when truth is loved more than approval can Christ's blessing unfold. And only then does the human being begin to grasp why such steadfastness brings joy, not because of pain endured, but because of light preserved. Part 1. What Christ meant by righteousness. Clarifying the foundation before the promise. Christ did not speak loosely. Every word he uttered rested upon the immutable laws of creation. Therefore, before his promise concerning persecution can be understood, the term righteousness must first be freed from human interpretation and restored to its lawful meaning. Without this foundation, the promise is inevitably distorted, sentimentalized, or misused. The Grail Message provides the clarity needed to understand righteousness not as a religious label, but as a living condition of the human spirit. Chapter 1. Righteousness is lawfulness, not morality. Righteousness is alignment with divine laws. Why good intentions are not righteousness. In common religious language, righteousness is often reduced to morality, being kind, charitable, well-behaved, or socially approved as good. While moral behavior may be outwardly valuable, it is not what Christ meant by righteousness. Morality is human-made and changes with cultures, eras, and emotions. Righteousness, however, is unchanging, because it is rooted in the laws of creation. In the Grail Message, righteousness is understood as lawfulness, conscious alignment with the divine laws that permeate and govern all existence. These laws operate precisely, without favoritism or exception. They are not negotiable, nor do they bend to human opinions or emotional interpretations. To be righteous is to think, will, and act in harmony with these laws. This immediately corrects a widespread misconception. Good intentions do not equal righteousness. A human being may sincerely intend to do good and yet act in complete opposition to the laws. Emotional pity, impulsive generosity, or blind tolerance can violate justice, responsibility, and truth. Where lawfulness is ignored, even well-meant actions produce harmful consequences. The laws respond to what is done and willed, not to how kindly a person feels about it. Christ himself consistently emphasized this lawfulness. He did not praise intention alone, but obedience. Not everyone who says to me, Lord, Lord, shall enter the kingdom of heaven, but he who does the will of my Father. The will of God is not arbitrary, it is expressed through the laws of creation. Righteousness, therefore, is not an emotional state or a moral reputation, but a condition of harmony with these laws. When persecution arises, for righteousness, sake, it does not arise because someone appears morally upright, religious, or emotionally sincere. It arises because lawful thinking and acting expose unlawfulness. Lawfulness disturbs disorder. Truth unsettles falsehood. This disturbance provokes resistance from those who benefit from distortion. Thus, righteousness must be understood first as unwavering fidelity to the laws, regardless of whether this fidelity is applauded or attacked. Chapter 2. Uprightness of will as the measure of the human being. Inner attitude versus outward behavior. Why righteousness begins before action. If righteousness is lawfulness, then its true measure cannot lie primarily in outward deeds. Actions are only the final link in a chain that begins far earlier, in thought, intention, and will. The Grail Message places decisive emphasis on the uprightness of will, for it is the will that determines which currents a human being opens himself to. A person may perform outwardly correct actions while inwardly motivated by fear, pride, ambition, or the desire for recognition. Such actions may earn human praise, but they do not carry the radiational quality of righteousness. Conversely, a person may be misunderstood, opposed, or even condemned by others, while inwardly striving honestly to recognize and obey the laws. In such a case, the will is upright even if the outer situation appears unfavorable. Christ judged human beings by this inner alignment. He consistently exposed hypocrisy, outward piety masking inner corruption. He also defended those whose hearts were sincere, even when their lives were imperfect. Uprightness of will does not mean flawlessness. It means honesty in striving, humility in recognition, and readiness to correct oneself when truth is shown. Righteousness therefore begins before action. It begins in the way a person thinks, evaluates, and decides. Does the will submit itself to truth, even when the truth is uncomfortable? Or does it bend truth to suit personal preferences, emotions, or advantages? This inner decision determines everything that follows. Persecution for righteousness. Sake arises precisely at this level. When a human being refuses to compromise inwardly, refuses to call falsehood truth, injustice justice, or disorder progress, tension arises. Others may demand conformity, silence, or emotional agreement. The righteous one does not resist loudly or aggressively, he simply does not betray his inner recognition. This quiet steadfastness is often enough to provoke hostility, because it exposes the inner instability of those who live against the laws. Chapter 3. Truthfulness, Responsibility, and Purity of Motive. The inner marks of the righteous. Why righteousness cannot be borrowed or imitated. Righteousness has unmistakable inner characteristics. Among the most important are truthfulness, responsibility, and purity of motive. These qualities are not learned through imitation, nor can they be assumed through association with a group, belief system, or religious identity. They must grow organically within the individual. Truthfulness begins with oneself. It is the courage to see one's own thoughts, weaknesses, and errors without self-deception. A righteous person does not hide behind slogans, doctrines, or collective opinions. He seeks truth above comfort. This inner honesty naturally extends outward, making it impossible for him to knowingly speak or support falsehood, even when doing so would bring social safety. Responsibility follows naturally from truthfulness. Whoever recognizes the laws understands that every thought and action has consequences. The righteous person does not blame fate, society, upbringing, or others for what he himself has willed and done. He accepts responsibility for his inner life and its effects. This alone already sets him apart in a world eager to shift blame and avoid accountability. Purity of motive is perhaps the most difficult mark of righteousness. It means acting without hidden self-serving aims, without the desire to appear superior, to be admired, to feel spiritually special, or to gain power over others. Where such motives exist, even good deeds become tainted. The Grail Message makes clear that the laws respond primarily to motive, not to appearance. For this reason, righteousness cannot be borrowed or imitated. One cannot become righteous by copying the language, behavior, or lifestyle of others. Nor can persecution be earned by adopting an oppositional posture. The laws are not deceived by outward forms. They respond only to what truly lives within. When Christ spoke of blessing those persecuted for righteousness, Sake, he addressed human beings who live these inner qualities quietly and consistently. Their righteousness is not loud, dramatic, or self-advertising. It is firm, clear, and inwardly free. When persecution comes, it comes because such a life cannot be absorbed into false systems without exposing them. Thus, before any promise can be understood, the foundation must be laid. Righteousness is lawfulness. It begins in the will. It is marked by truthfulness, responsibility, and purity of motive. Only where these are present can Christ's words unfold their true meaning, and only then can persecution become a test that strengthens rather than a misunderstanding that misleads. Part 2. WHAT, Persecution, really is. Separating truth from religious illusion. Christ's words about persecution have been among the most dangerously misunderstood statements in all of Scripture. Through emotional interpretation, many have confused suffering with righteousness, opposition with holiness, and victimhood with spiritual merit. The Grail Message restores clarity by placing persecution back into the framework of spiritual law, radiation, and responsibility. Persecution is not a badge one seeks. It is not proof of being right. It is not automatic reward. It is a consequence, lawful and precise, arising only when light encounters resistance from darkness. To understand Christ's promise, humanity must first understand what persecution is not, before grasping what it truly is. Chapter 4. Persecution is not every form of suffering. Why hardship alone does not bring blessing. One of the gravest distortions of Christ's words is the belief that any form of suffering automatically brings divine favor. This belief has led many into passivity, resignation, and even unconscious rebellion against God's laws, under the illusion that pain itself is holy. The Grail Message corrects this error clearly. Suffering has no spiritual value in itself. Only the cause of suffering determines its meaning. Human life on earth contains many forms of hardship, poverty, illness, loss, failure, conflict. These arise largely from past wrong volition, collective human error, ignorance of spiritual laws, or unresolved karmic threads. Such suffering is instructional, not rewarding. It calls for learning, correction, and inner change, not celebration. Christ did not say, "Blessed are those who suffer." He said, "Blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness." Sake. This distinction is decisive. The danger of victim thinking. Victim thinking arises when a person interprets every difficulty as persecution and every disagreement as an attack on righteousness. This mindset is spiritually destructive, because it blinds the individual to self-responsibility, prevents honest self-examination, and feeds pride disguised as humility. From the Grail perspective, true righteousness never clings to victimhood. It stands upright, calm, and clear, even under pressure. A person who constantly feels persecuted should first ask, is my will truly pure? Am I aligned with truth, or with opinion? Is the resistance I encounter arising from light, or from my own sharpness, pride, or emotional excess? Many conflicts attributed to persecution are, in truth, reactions to arrogance, moral superiority, lack of love, or unbalanced zeal. Christ's promise does not apply to such cases. Chapter 5. Opposition is a natural reaction to light. Why truth disturbs darkness. When Christ spoke of persecution, he referred to a lawful radiational effect, not a moral drama. Light and darkness do not coexist peacefully. Where light enters, darkness is unsettled, exposed, and weakened. This disturbance produces resistance, not because light attacks, but because darkness cannot endure clarity. The Grail Message explains that every human being emits radiations through thoughts, inner attitude, motives, and will direction. A person who lives in righteousness, meaning alignment with divine laws, radiates clarity, order, truthfulness, and inner uprightness. Such radiation silently challenges falsehood, self-deception, moral compromise, and hidden guilt in others. Thus, opposition arises without words, without intent, without aggression. Radiational conflict explained. Persecution often begins invisibly. Unease in others, irritation without clear cause, subtle resistance, inner rejection. This is radiational conflict, not personal hostility. The righteous person does not need to confront, accuse, or expose. Their being does the work. This explains why Christ himself faced increasing opposition despite his gentleness, love, and restraint. His presence revealed inner states in others, something darkness always resists. Therefore, persecution is not sought, is not provoked, is not dramatic. It is the quiet friction between truth and falsehood. Chapter 6. Social, religious, and intellectual persecution. How society resists righteousness quietly. In earlier ages, persecution often appeared as physical violence. In modern times, it is more subtle, refined, and socially acceptable. The Grail Message reveals that modern persecution is primarily psychological, social, and intellectual. It manifests as exclusion instead of execution, ridicule instead of imprisonment, distortion instead of accusation. A righteous individual today may experience being misunderstood deliberately, having words twisted, being labeled extreme, naive, or dangerous, quiet isolation from opportunities and platforms. This form of persecution is often more difficult because it attacks inner stability, not the body. Religious persecution. When institutions resist truth. One of the most painful forms of persecution arises within religious environments themselves. Institutions, once formed, tend to protect structure, tradition, and authority, even when truth calls for correction. Thus, righteousness may be resisted by doctrine, hierarchy, emotional loyalty to tradition. Christ himself encountered his strongest opposition not from obvious wrongdoers, but from those who believed they were serving God. This remains unchanged. Intellectual persecution. The mockery of the modern world. In a world dominated by intellect, intuition and spiritual perception are often mocked. Righteousness is dismissed as unscientific, outdated, unrealistic, or unprovable. Such dismissal is not neutral. It is a defense mechanism of intellect against higher recognition. The righteous individual does not fight this mockery. They remain calm, factual, inwardly firm, knowing that truth does not need approval to remain truth. Closing illumination of Part 2. Christ's words were never an invitation to seek suffering, nor a promise of emotional comfort. They were a statement of law. When a human being aligns with righteousness, truly, quietly, purely, resistance will arise wherever falsehood exists. This resistance is not a punishment. It is not failure. It is not proof of superiority. It is simply the reaction of darkness to light. Only those who endure such opposition without bitterness, without pride, and without deviation from truth may rightly understand Christ's words. Rejoice, for great is your reward in heaven. For their joy does not arise from persecution, but from remaining faithful to light despite it. Part 3. False interpretations that must be corrected. Where humanity went wrong. Before the blessing spoken by Christ can be lived, the false paths built around it must be dismantled. Much suffering today does not arise from righteousness, but from misunderstanding, ego, sentimentality, and self-created illusion. Christ's words were never an invitation to pain, conflict, or self-glorification. They were a sober description of lawful consequences when light meets darkness. Chapter 7. The Error of Seeking Persecution. Why martyrdom thinking is dangerous. The difference between faithfulness and fanaticism. One of the gravest distortions of Christ's words is the belief that persecution is something to be sought. Through this error, suffering became a spiritual badge, and conflict a supposed proof of faith. This inversion has led countless souls away from righteousness and into self-made hardship. The Grail Message makes clear, no human being is called to seek suffering. Suffering arises only where there is friction with existing darkness. When righteousness is lived quietly, naturally, and lawfully, persecution is not pursued, it occurs only if darkness feels threatened by light. Martyrdom thinking is dangerous because it subtly shifts the focus away from inner purification toward outer drama. The soul begins to measure its worth by resistance received rather than by purity maintained. This leads to exaggerated speech, provocative behavior, and unnecessary confrontation, all falsely labeled as courage. Faithfulness, by contrast, is calm, steady, and inwardly anchored. It does not shout truth, it lives it. It does not provoke opposition, it simply refuses to bend away from what is right. Fanaticism, however, thrives on friction. It seeks enemies to confirm its imagined righteousness. Christ did not bless those who look for persecution. He blessed those who remain upright when persecution arises without their seeking it. The difference is decisive. Where persecution is pursued, pride is already at work. Where righteousness is lived, humility stands guard. Chapter 8. Emotional Christianity and the Glorification of Suffering. Why pain is not proof of truth. How sentimentality replaced lawfulness. Another grave misinterpretation arose when emotion replaced spiritual law. Over centuries, Christianity drifted from Christ's clarity into sentimental suffering, where tears, pain, and endurance were treated as signs of holiness. But emotion is not light. Pain does not sanctify. Tears do not purify. Only alignment with divine law brings spiritual elevation. Emotional Christianity taught humanity to admire suffering rather than to question its cause. This led to the belief that enduring misery automatically pleases God, even when that misery arose from wrong thinking, wrong choices, or inner disorder. The Grail Message corrects this firmly. Suffering is not a virtue. It is a signal. True righteousness seeks harmony with the laws of creation. Where harmony exists, suffering diminishes. Where suffering persists, something within is misaligned, either in will, understanding, or responsibility. Sentimentality dulled discernment. It replaced clarity with pity, lawfulness with indulgence, and truth with comfort. In this atmosphere, Christ's words about persecution were stripped of their lawful context and turned into emotional consolation. Christ did not say, "Blessed are those who suffer." He said, "Blessed are those persecuted for righteousness." Sake. That distinction changes everything. Chapter 9. When ego dresses itself as righteousness. Self-importance mistaken for spiritual courage. Why pride attracts resistance, not blessing. Perhaps the most subtle distortion occurs when ego cloaks itself in spiritual language. Here, a person believes they stand for righteousness, while in truth they stand for their own importance, opinions, or recognition. Such a person attracts resistance, but not because of light. They attract resistance because ego provokes. Pride speaks loudly. It corrects others harshly. It demands agreement. It labels disagreement as persecution. Yet this resistance carries no blessing, because it is not persecution for righteousness. Sake. It is collision caused by self-will. The Grail Message reveals a sobering truth. Light does not provoke, it exposes. Ego provokes, light simply is. True righteousness does not need defenders. It radiates quietly. Those who live it are often unnoticed until their presence silently unsettles what is false. Ego, however, seeks acknowledgement and frames opposition as proof of greatness. This is why Christ warned against self-righteousness throughout his teaching. Ego blinds the inner eye and makes the soul incapable of recognizing whether resistance comes from darkness, or from its own distortion. Where humility reigns, persecution, if it comes, comes cleanly. Where pride reigns, conflict multiplies fruitlessly. The blessing belongs only to the former. Closing of Part 3. Before one can rejoice in persecution for righteousness, Sake, one must first ensure that what is lived is truly righteousness, and that any resistance arises not from ego, emotional excess, or fanaticism, but solely from unwavering alignment with truth. Only then does Christ's promise begin to unfold lawfully. Part 4. Why the righteous are opposed. The lawful explanation. Righteousness does not provoke opposition because it seeks conflict, but because it is incompatible with falsehood. Where truth appears, error is unsettled. Where light radiates, darkness cannot remain undisturbed. This part reveals why opposition is lawful, not accidental, and why it is never the righteous who initiate persecution. Chapter 10. Radiational Law and the Disturbance of Darkness. Righteousness is not merely a moral stance or a personal conviction. In the Grail Message, righteousness is understood as radiational alignment with the divine laws of creation. Every thought, motive, and act radiates according to its inner quality. Light radiates light, impurity radiates disturbance. When a human being lives uprightly, truthful in will, pure in motive, and responsible in action, his or her presence alone creates contrast. This contrast is not intellectual, it is radiational. Darkness does not need to be accused to feel exposed. It reacts because it is incompatible with light. This explains why righteous individuals often face resistance even when they say nothing. Their clarity unsettles environments built on compromise. Their uprightness reveals dishonesty without accusation. Their consistency exposes hypocrisy without confrontation. Darkness reacts defensively because it cannot endure the radiational pressure of truth. This reaction may take subtle forms: irritation, mockery, misrepresentation, exclusion, or quiet sabotage. The righteous one has not attacked, light has simply arrived. Here lies an essential correction. Opposition does not validate righteousness, but righteousness naturally attracts opposition where darkness is entrenched. The reaction is lawful. Darkness recoils from light as impurity recoils from purity. This is not punishment, nor injustice, it is the natural effect of radiational law. The righteous must therefore understand, persecution is not proof of divine favor, but a sign that light is functioning lawfully in an unclean environment. Chapter 11. The threat of uprightness to established error. Error does not exist in isolation. Over time, it crystallizes into systems, religious, social, intellectual, and cultural, that depend on compromise to survive. Such systems fear righteousness not because it is aggressive, but because it is uncompromising. Uprightness threatens established error in three ways. First, it removes justification. When someone lives truthfully, excuses collapse. Error can no longer claim ignorance or necessity. Second, it breaks collective illusion. Many systems persist because everyone agrees. One upright human being silently contradicts the agreement by living differently. Third, it refuses participation. Righteousness does not cooperate with falsehood. It withdraws energy, attention, and endorsement. This withdrawal weakens error far more than confrontation. For this reason, persecution often appears not as violence, but as distortion. The righteous are misunderstood, labeled extreme, unloving, arrogant, or dangerous, not because they are, but because error must discredit what it cannot absorb. Religious institutions have often persecuted righteousness quietly, by silencing, marginalizing, or spiritualizing away uncomfortable truth. Intellectual systems persecute through ridicule and dismissal. Social systems persecute through exclusion and pressure to conform. This is why Christ himself faced opposition from religious authorities rather than criminals. Error fears exposure more than accusation. Thus, persecution is often subtle, systematic, and clothed in reasonableness. The righteous must learn to recognize this without bitterness, remaining calm, clear, and inwardly unshaken. Chapter 12. Why righteousness cannot compromise. Righteousness cannot compromise because truth is not negotiable. Compromise belongs to human convenience, not to divine law. Where compromise begins, righteousness ends. Many misunderstand this firmness as hardness or lack of love. In reality, compromise with falsehood is spiritual betrayal. Love that abandons truth is no longer love, it becomes indulgence. Christ did not say, "Blessed are you when you compromise for peace." He spoke of righteousness, alignment with law. Righteousness stands, even when standing brings loss. The cost of righteousness may include misunderstanding, loneliness, or opposition. But compromise costs far more: inner fragmentation, loss of clarity, and eventual collapse. Here lies another correction. The righteous do not rejoice because they are persecuted, they rejoice because they have not betrayed truth. The joy Christ spoke of is not emotional excitement. It is the quiet certainty that one stands in harmony with the laws of creation. This harmony brings strength, even under pressure. Righteousness remains firm without aggression, clear without hatred, and steady without fear. It does not need to fight darkness, it simply refuses to become dark. Such steadfastness is intolerable to error, yet unassailable by it. Darkness may resist, but it cannot overcome light that remains pure. This is the lawful reason the righteous are opposed, and the lawful reason they ultimately stand. Part 5. Rejoice, the most difficult command. Correcting the emotional misunderstanding. Christ's instruction to rejoice when persecuted for righteousness, Sake, is perhaps the most misunderstood portion of this teaching. Through centuries of emotional religion, it has been distorted into a call for emotional excitement, forced cheerfulness, or even masochistic delight in suffering. In truth, Christ spoke of something far deeper, calmer, and more lawful. Rejoicing, as Christ meant it, has nothing to do with emotional pleasure in hardship. It refers to a state of inner certainty and strength that arises from alignment with divine law. Only when this is understood can the promise attached to righteousness be grasped without distortion. Chapter 13. Rejoicing is not emotional happiness. The first correction that must be made is this: rejoicing is not happiness, and certainly not emotional excitement. Emotional happiness depends on circumstances, approval, comfort, and success. When these are threatened or removed, emotional happiness collapses. Christ did not call human beings to emotional reactions. He spoke to the spirit, not to the nerves. To rejoice in the midst of opposition does not mean to smile through pain or pretend that injustice does not hurt. Such behavior would be artificial and inwardly dishonest. True rejoicing is inner firmness, the quiet certainty that one stands in what is right, regardless of outer response. It is the peace that arises when the will is aligned with truth, even when the world resists the truth. Those who attempt to feel happy during persecution misunderstand Christ entirely. This misunderstanding leads either to hypocrisy or to inner breakdown. The human being tries to force emotions that do not arise naturally, creating inner tension instead of strength. Christ never demanded emotional denial. He demanded spiritual clarity. When righteousness is lived purely, the human being may feel pain, loneliness, or sorrow, yet beneath these feelings lies something unshakable, the certainty of standing in law. That certainty is the source of rejoicing. Thus, rejoicing is not laughter, excitement, or enthusiasm. It is inner stability that cannot be robbed by rejection or hostility. Chapter 14. Joy as inner certainty and stability. The joy Christ referred to is not an emotion, it is a state of being. It arises when a human being no longer depends on outer approval to know their worth or direction. Such joy is calm, quiet, and strong. This inner certainty comes from knowing, I am acting in accordance with truth. No argument can replace this knowing. No accusation can shake it. The righteous human being does not rejoice because they are attacked, but because attack no longer determines their inner state. Fear dissolves when one understands that nothing unrighteous can ultimately harm what stands in light. This joy brings freedom from resentment. The righteous do not secretly wish harm upon their opponents, nor do they brood over injustice. They recognize opposition as a lawful reaction of darkness to light, not as a personal insult. Such joy also frees the soul from bitterness. Bitterness binds, joy releases. Bitterness keeps the soul entangled with those who oppose it, while joy allows inward independence. This is why Christ could speak of rejoicing without contradiction. He addressed those who would stand so firmly in truth that outer hostility would no longer govern their inner life. This joy is quiet victory, victory over fear, over emotional dependency, and over the need to be understood by those who do not wish to see. Chapter 15. The Power of Silent Uprightness. One of the greatest misunderstandings of persecution is the belief that the righteous must constantly defend themselves. In truth, uprightness needs no defense. Christ did not say, argue, protest, or retaliate. He said, rejoice. This points to trust in law, not trust in personal struggle. Silent uprightness carries immense power. It radiates clarity without words and exposes falsehood without accusation. This is precisely why it provokes resistance. Darkness cannot tolerate being exposed simply by presence. The righteous human being does not need to convince others of their innocence. Truth does not require persuasion, it requires consistency. Over time, law itself separates what is genuine from what is false. Trusting in law means releasing the desire for revenge, justification, or emotional vindication. It means knowing that every deed, every word, and every intention returns to its origin with exact justice. This trust brings peace even in isolation. The righteous may walk alone for a time, but they are never abandoned by law. Their reward is not applause, nor earthly success, but inner freedom and spiritual continuity. Thus, rejoicing becomes possible, not because persecution is pleasant, but because righteousness brings something far greater, unshakable alignment with truth. Part 6. Great is your reward in heaven. What the reward truly is. Chapter 16. Heaven is a state of being, not a place. Heaven is not a geographical location nor a distant, abstract reward. It is a condition of being aligned with the law of God, the radiational light, and the order of creation. When a human lives uprightly, free from compromise, fear, and deceit, their inner being vibrates in harmony with the spiritual order. This alignment is the true heaven promised in Scripture. Christ's words must not be interpreted materially. The reward is not external accolades, social recognition, or even the avoidance of worldly suffering. Instead, it is the cultivation of inner clarity, stability, and freedom, a state in which the soul experiences its rightful place within creation. Those who understand this principle recognize that righteous living itself is the reward. Chapter 17, The Inner Harvest of Righteous Living. The fruits of righteousness manifest as peace, clarity, and strength in the soul. Every upright act, every law-abiding decision, contributes to a harvest that nourishes the human spirit. This harvest is invisible to the worldly eye but is profoundly real in the radiational world. Through steadfast alignment with divine law, humans develop the capacity to remain unshaken by opposition, criticism, or persecution. Their inner life becomes a reservoir of energy, calmness, and insight. This inner freedom is the lawful outcome of conscious obedience to spiritual principles, and it ensures that even amidst trials, the spirit remains sovereign. Chapter 18, Radiational Elevation Through Uprightness. Upright living produces radiations that lift the human being above the limitations of fear, confusion, and worldly attachment. Just as the sun radiates light outward, the upright human radiates purity, clarity, and strength, influencing the world without imposing or coercing. This elevation is cumulative. Each act of justice, each moment of truthfulness, each choice to follow the law rather than human preference adds to the radiational growth of the soul. Righteousness, therefore, has both immediate and long-term effects. It strengthens the individual in the present and ensures that their spirit remains connected to eternal light beyond earthly existence. Living righteously is not a means to worldly reward but a participation in the ongoing order of the universe. In this, the promise of Christ is fulfilled. The human being who endures opposition for the sake of truth experiences the true reward, their own spirit in harmony with heaven. Part 7. Living this word today. Practical application without fanaticism. Chapter 19. How to stand upright without provoking conflict. Standing in righteousness does not require confrontation. True uprightness manifests as strength that is calm and unshakable. The human being who follows the law and acts in purity radiates authority through example rather than through argument or aggression. Strength without aggression means holding fast to truth without forcing others to comply. Clarity without condemnation allows one to discern right and wrong while maintaining inner peace. The upright human remains a beacon of light, even when surrounded by opposition. By living lawfully and consistently, one naturally demonstrates the principles of Christ, inspiring others without inciting resentment. Chapter 20. When to speak and when to be silent. Discernment is essential in the exercise of judgment and communication. The Spirit must guide speech. Not every injustice or error requires comment. Silence can be a tool for protection, reflection, and observation, ensuring that reactions are governed by lawfulness rather than emotion. Speaking when the inner guidance calls is equally crucial. Upright communication must clarify, correct, or prevent harm without carrying malice or pride. The balance between speaking and silence strengthens the human being's radiational alignment, preserves energy, and prevents entanglement in unnecessary conflict. Chapter 21. Remaining clean in a hostile environment. Maintaining purity in thought, word, and deed amidst hostility requires vigilance and inner discipline. One must guard against absorbing bitterness, resentment, or falsehood from the surroundings. The upright human does not adopt the darkness of others but preserves the radiational integrity of the spirit. Practical strategies include focusing on inner convictions rather than external approval, performing righteous acts without expectation of reward or recognition, and daily purification through meditation and reflection. By protecting the inner life, the human being remains steadfast, even in environments of hostility or widespread confusion. Through these practices, the promise of Christ's words is actualized. Persecution for righteousness, Sake, is met not with fear or reactivity, but with calm endurance, clarity, and joy in alignment with the law and the light. Conclusion. The quiet strength of the righteous. The human being who lives in righteousness does not seek recognition, applause, or approval from others. True uprightness is not dependent upon external acknowledgement, it is a state of alignment with the law and with the light. This alignment brings its own protection, its own peace, and its own strength. Righteousness shields the spirit because it is founded on lawfulness, purity of intention, and clarity of vision. When the human acts from this inner foundation, outer circumstances, mockery, opposition, or persecution, cannot shake the inner core. The strength of the upright is silent, radiational, and self-sustaining. It does not assert itself through force but manifests as calm authority, discernment, and resilience. Standing firm without hatred or fear is the hallmark of the righteous. Hatred is a distortion that disrupts the radiational harmony of the spirit, while fear clouds judgment and weakens willpower. By remaining free from these distortions, the righteous can observe, act, and endure without compromise. The peace of conscience, the clarity of purpose, and the inner joy of alignment with truth become the human being's greatest rewards here and now. The human who cultivates this quiet strength is a beacon of light in a world often guided by confusion, selfishness, and false standards. Such a one demonstrates, through mere being, the profound wisdom of Christ's words: to stand upright is not to dominate or retaliate, but to remain loyal to the law, to the light, and to the inner recognition of right. In this state, the promise of, "Blessed are you when men persecute you for righteousness," Sake. Rejoice, for great is your reward in heaven, is fully realized. The reward is not a distant prize but the natural radiational consequence of inner harmony, moral clarity, and steadfast alignment with the divine order. The righteous human being, therefore, walks with confidence, joy, and serenity, regardless of external turbulence. Epilogue: the coming separation. The time is approaching when righteousness, clarity, and uprightness will no longer be able to coexist comfortably with error, compromise, and falsehood. Humanity has long tolerated half-truths, moral ambiguity, and the blending of light with darkness. Yet the law is unchangeable. The radiations of purity and truth cannot be diluted without consequence. The forthcoming separation is not a punishment, it is the natural outcome of lawfulness asserting itself. Righteousness will stand alone because the human spirit that truly aligns with the light cannot accept falsehood as companion. The upright will increasingly find themselves isolated from those who embrace error, deception, and self-interest. This isolation is not a suffering but a liberation, for it frees the spirit from compromise and from the radiational disturbance of impurity. The clarity of conscience will become a refuge, the inner recognition of truth a guiding star, and the alignment with law a shield against the chaos of the outer world. Those who have cultivated inner uprightness, moral discernment, and steadfast alignment with the law will endure. They will stand firm when systems, societies, and even close associates fall away, because their strength arises from radiational purity, not from social approval or material security. Compromise, expediency, and emotional indulgence can no longer sustain existence in a world where light must fully manifest. Only those who live lawfully inwardly will find their place. The coming purification will reveal every hidden motive, every unacknowledged deviation, and every false loyalty. The upright will emerge as clear-sighted, free from internal corruption, and attuned to the eternal principles that govern all life. The outer conflicts and pressures will serve as tests, confirming the resilience of the spirit and the fidelity of the soul to truth. Ultimately, this separation is a demonstration of the immutable order. Light and darkness cannot mingle indefinitely. The human being who has embraced righteousness, understood Christ's teaching, and cultivated the inner faculties of recognition will be counted among those who stand in clarity, free from error and unwavering in moral and spiritual alignment. The promise is certain. Those who remain true inwardly will experience the full reward of lawfulness, radiational harmony, and enduring peace. In this new reality, the external world will reflect the inner condition of humanity. Where the upright stand, light shines; where compromise reigns, darkness will recede. The separation is thus both a trial and a triumph, a necessary unfolding of divine order that allows only the purified, the truthful, and the steadfast to endure and prosper in the full radiance of spiritual law. Appendix: Practical guidance for the righteous. The path of righteousness is not abstract, it is a daily exercise in awareness, alignment, and conscientious action. The following practices are designed to strengthen the human spirit under opposition, sharpen recognition of inner motives, and cultivate steadfastness in truth and lawfulness. 1. Meditations for strength under opposition. Begin each day with quiet reflection, focusing on the inner presence of law and light. Visualize yourself standing unshaken, even when confronted with misunderstanding or hostility. Observe any feelings of fear, resentment, or weakness, and allow the awareness of universal order to replace them with calm certainty. Recognize that opposition is not a punishment but a radiational test that reveals the strength of your alignment. By meditating daily on law and justice, you cultivate a mental and spiritual fortress that remains unshaken by the pressures of the world. 2. Exercises for examining motives and pride. At the close of each day, review your actions and thoughts carefully. Ask yourself, was this action motivated by lawfulness or by self-interest? Did pride or desire for approval influence my decisions? Use honest self-examination to uncover hidden distortions. Writing these reflections down strengthens recognition and prevents unconscious repetition of error. The Grail Message emphasizes that inner uprightness is the measure of all external alignment. Without examining motives, one cannot distinguish between the true principle and the wrong principle. 3. Daily practices for upright living without fear. Practice doing what is right, even when it attracts criticism, mockery, or opposition. Start with small, everyday acts. Speak truthfully, fulfill responsibilities without compromise, and resist inclinations toward convenience or deceit. Observe the radiational effect of these acts. Notice how clarity, calm, and inner confidence increase. Avoid seeking recognition. True uprightness is independent of applause or reward. Over time, these daily disciplines solidify inner strength, preparing the spirit to endure greater trials with integrity. 4. Prayers for inner stability and trust in the law. In prayer or silent communion, affirm your trust in divine law and the natural order. Seek guidance to act rightly, to perceive truth clearly, and to remain unmoved by external disturbances. These prayers are not appeals for favor, but confirmations of alignment. They strengthen the soul's resistance to fear, pride, and compromise, and cultivate trust that lawful action produces lasting harmony. Incorporate this practice morning and evening, creating a rhythm of spiritual fortification. 5. Weekly self-review for truthfulness and responsibility. Once a week, conduct a structured review of your conduct, thoughts, and motives. Examine where lawfulness was upheld and where compromise, fear, or pride influenced action. Plan corrections and establish intentions for improvement. The weekly review acts as a mirror for the soul, reinforcing recognition, responsibility, and moral clarity. By doing so consistently, the human being progressively aligns with the true principle, demonstrating steadfastness in the face of worldly pressures and inner temptations. These practices, when applied diligently, provide both protection and growth. The righteous human being is not free from opposition but is strengthened by it. Through meditation, reflection, disciplined action, prayer, and honest self-assessment, one can stand in the light, remain unwavering in lawfulness, and participate in the radiational harmony that the Grail Message reveals as the foundation of all true life.